Hello, I'm Derek Mowbray. I'm a psychologist. I specialise in the primary prevention of psychological distress at work. I'm interested in stress because stress is one of the biggest inhibitors to performance. And if we can prevent the events and behaviours from occurring which trigger stressful responses in other people, then we stand a really good chance of improving performance of individuals as well as organisations. So this programme is about trying to identify the triggers which help organisations and individuals achieve psychological well-being. The programme is in 4 sections. The first one is looking at the background as to why we're interested in stress, what we can do about it, the different degrees of stress, how we can set about thinking about resolving the issues of preventing events and behaviours from occurring in the first place. The second section is about finding solutions to the problems of stress. The third is about embedding some of those solutions into organisations, the frameworks that are needed, the fundamental principles behind the frameworks. And the last section is to do with the implementation of the processes to prevent stress from occurring in the first place. I should just add that the process of prevention also encourages organisations to implement triggers which achieve peak performance consistently. So the mere prevention of stress isn't enough, it actually produces a fabulous place to work. First thing to consider is that organisations are controlled communities. They're controlled by people like you and me, who we call managers. Now, managers have a fundamental influence on the way in which people perform at work. They can create an environment which is very positive and very supportive of individuals at work, and unfortunately more frequently they can create an environment which doesn't necessarily support people very effectively at work. If we want to have an environment that's very supportive, then we need managers whose attitude towards the workplace is itself very positive, and therefore that will come out in their behaviours. So manager behaviour can make the difference between failure, being average, and achieving a consistently high level of peak performance. We're going to have a look at the challenges that organisations and the workforce face. We start by having a look at the different types of challenges which exist. Adaptive challenges are those challenges where the solutions are nearly always speculative. They're not always certain, they may be ambiguous, but they're always speculative. By contrast, there are technical challenges where the solutions to the challenge are always certain. If you press a button, the output or outcome is always the same. Now, in organisations, the adaptive challenges are much more likely to be those which relate to the way in which the organisation is led and managed, whilst technical challenges are much more likely to be related to functions like, let's say, engineering, manufacturing, or even information technology, to a certain degree at least. So in general, the challenges that organisations face which are adaptive are these. Now, in this slide, I've put the risks which organisations and the workforce face. Risks are important because we can anticipate risks. They are, by their nature, things in the future. And if we can see these things in the future, we can prepare ourselves in order to mitigate the impact that risks may have both on the organisation itself and also on the workforce. So have a look at these general risks which organisations experience. Now, when these risks are not adequately dealt with, they turn into what we know as threats. Now, the biggest threat to us is us. We just need to have a look around at anybody that we see, and we can see that they are our biggest threat. We have this incredible capacity of causing misery in other people. We also have the capacity, of course, to make people feel fantastic. But what we're trying to do here is to have a look at the sort of events which people experience at work. On the top left-hand side of the slide, we've got events which are consequential upon the organisation making changes as a whole. On the right-hand side, we've got events which occur on a day-to-day sort of basis within organisations. And at the bottom, we've got the behaviours of people which occur on a day-by-day basis, most of which are as a response to events that have taken place. Have a look at this slide and see whether you've experienced any of the events and behaviours yourself. What are the challenges, the risks and threats that your own organisation is facing? Just take a minute or so to jot down for yourself the sort of risks and threats which occur to you personally and to your organisation. Now we're going to have a look at the impact that risks and threats have on performance. What we're concerned about is the impact on individuals which may cause them to feel stress. The difficulty with the term stress is that it's used in so many different situations and for so many different reasons that the term itself is now beginning to lose its value. In order to try and do something about this, I've put up on the screen now a definition of stress. As you can see, it's an extreme adverse response to personal perception of uncontrollable pressure, tension and strain. So the key elements of this definition include the extreme nature of the response and also this personal perception of being out of control. In other words, our perception of uncontrollable pressure, tension and strain. So stress occurs when we lose mental control over a situation, where we can't concentrate enough in order to galvanise our own personal ideas as to how to deal with or cope with a stressful event. Genuine stress is really serious. People who have experienced genuine stress simply wouldn't be at work. You suffer headaches, you get muscle spasms, you get pain, you get shivers and shakes, you certainly don't want to talk to people, you want to hibernate, and it's such a dreadful condition that if it's not treated properly, you can deteriorate into some of the worst physical conditions. However, most people don't necessarily suffer from genuine stress. One of the key features, though, of genuine stress, which is important to understand, is that by contrast to normal infections where individuals return back to normal health, what we call homeostasis, with people who have suffered from genuine stress, they seldom, if ever, actually return back to normal. They return back to something resembling a new normal, which is less than a complete return to normality. So if you've suffered from genuine stress, you can expect your tolerance of stressful situations to be less capable, if you like, of resolution. And so you sort of partially return back to normal. So you can imagine that in an organisation that creates stress amongst the workforce, that you can see that not everybody will return back to normal after experiencing stress. Therefore, you develop a sort of chronic level of stress within the organisation as a whole, which may go on for a very long time and have a major inhibiting impact upon the motivation, enthusiasm, innovation, and the corporate resilience that the organisation needs to experience in order to survive in the future. But as I say, stress is at the serious end of the business. It is, in fact, at the wrong end of a continuum which starts with pressure. Pressure is a stimulant. It's a stimulant because our adrenaline and cortisol pump around our system, and they, combined together, make us concentrate at a very intense level on a particular task that we're performing. But pressure only remains a stimulant insofar as we keep control of the situation. If we don't keep control and we lose control, in other words, pressure becomes a constant and we consistently find ourselves under pressure, we then lose our control, we can deteriorate into tension. Tension is also a stimulus. It's a stimulus because we can feel tense, and the sensation is something that we don't like. We actually want to get rid of tension. You feel uncomfortable. Some people can experience headaches. Some people have muscle spasms and so on. But there is that sort of sensation that we have which we don't like, rather like being stuck in a traffic jam on the way to a meeting and knowing we're going to be late, but also knowing that we are the first person to speak at that meeting. That sort of sensation of being late for something that's important to us makes us feel very agitated, and we want to get rid of that tension. So it's because of our need to get rid of that tension that it becomes a stimulus. If, however, we can't get rid of that sensation, then we deteriorate into strain. Strain becomes an impairment because we think about the cause of the sensations that we've got. Up to this point, with pressure and tension, we're still capable of focusing on the task at hand. But once we start deteriorating down into strain, our focus is no longer on the task in hand, but on the cause of the sensation that we're experiencing, whether that's excess demand, or whether indeed it's the traffic jam, or it's that boss that's a bully, or childcare problems at home. Doesn't matter what it is, our mind is diverted from being focused on the task we want to perform. Now, if we can't bring ourselves into control over that, then we can deteriorate down into stress, which is a catastrophe, because in large part, stress can be prevented. Now, in this slide, we can see the sort of features which relate to the different degrees of stress. I've got the different degrees of stress on the left-hand side of the slide, and we can see that under pressure and tension that we've got some headlines which are all geared towards trying to create commitment, trust and engagement at work. However, it's perfectly possible for people to deteriorate down into the middle section where they start experiencing tension and strain, and it's in this middle section that people become present at work in body but not in mind, which is what we call psychopresenteeism, where people become disengaged with the tasks that they perform and the organisation that they're with. And it may well be that over a period of time, or with one catastrophic event, that people can't tolerate being present at work in body but not in mind and actually need to escape. Now, the costs of psychopresenteeism, people being at work in body but not in mind, are considered to be really very high. This particular slide, it comes from research in the United Kingdom in 2008 and shows that the costs of psychopresenteeism are about 1.5 times the combined cost of sickness, absence and staff turnover. Other studies have indicated that the percentage is greater, maybe twice the costs of the combined costs of sickness, absence and staff turnover, and some studies have gone up to 5 times the combined cost. Whatever the reality is for your organisation, it is a large sum of money that's being lost through lost resources and the need to double up and use different forms of resource for people who are unable to concentrate effectively. So we need to find solutions to psychopresenteeism and to stress. Our approach here is to construct organisations that facilitate, provoke and cajole people to feel psychologically well, and which also motivates them to concentrate on achieving future success for themselves and for their organisation. If we can do that, then this produces a resilient organisation, one that's flexible, adaptable, strong and successful. The trouble is that it's quite difficult to envisage what this means in reality. So on this slide, I've put up a description of a fabulous place to work. So have a look at this slide and see what you think about the component parts of a fabulous place to work and whether indeed you are working in one of these places yourself. So you can see from the slide that there are some critical components like having a clear purpose, people being able to behave with respect to others, sharing responsibility for future success, people who feel confident enough to provide unsolicited ideas and stimulus to each other, and also people who are leading the organisation, who challenge their staff and provide opportunities for personal development. Now that could be used as a template for developing your own fabulous place to work. There are other spin-offs from achieving a fabulous place to work, and in this slide we can see what those spin-offs might be. First of all, it's sustained corporate performance at high level. Then we've got other parts of the ingredients coming in here. We produce organisations with innovative products and services, with strong social engagement being that element of engagement where people get a real buzz from the work that they're involved with, and they get their energy from being successful at the work that they complete. Then further around the circle we've got vibrancy. We've got lower costs because people are much more engaged with the activities and therefore less diverted by events and poor behaviours. We know that higher profits occur from organisations which are fabulous places to work, and we know that there are some other hard data such as low sickness absence and low presenteeism. So there are many reasons for going for a very positive and fabulous place to work. The question is, how do we do it? Well, the focus here is on trying to create psychological well-being amongst the workforce, which then produces peak performance. So keep in mind that if you feel well, you're much more likely to perform better than if you feel unwell. And feeling well has not necessarily got very much to do with your health, but has a lot to do with how you feel. So you can be physically unwell, you can have some form of diagnosis, but still feel well enough in order to be able to concentrate and focus attention on tasks to be completed. So when we're thinking about well-being and performance, we're thinking about trying to encourage people to feel well. So what are the ingredients for feeling well? Well, in this slide we've got some headlines here. There are basically 2 pillars for psychological well-being. One is having a purpose in life, and that means maybe having several purposes in life, one after the other, or several at the same time. it doesn't really matter as long as we have something which is important to us, which we want to achieve. Then we can have a whole series of other inputs into our psychological well-being coming from a variety of different sources, which are also shown in this slide. Another way of looking at the different sources of well-being for us is to have a look at this slide and see the different contributions. Happiness is a sense of real joy. Self-efficacy is knowing that when we set our mind to do something, we can actually achieve it. Hope is future optimism. Self-esteem is all about thinking of ourselves in a very positive light. Flow is getting an energy from the work and activities that we're engaged in. Optimism is about being perpetually positive. Attachment is all about being committed to something in a very strong manner. Gratification is being thanked for activities that we're engaged in. Empowerment is all about having control over our own situation so that we can actually do the things which self-efficacy is about. Pleasure is a sense of joy as well as happiness, that we get a real buzz of relaxation as a result of pleasure. Meaning is all about understanding what's going on around us, and if we don't understand it, then we lose mental control. Resilience is all about having an attitude towards events and other people's behaviour, and success is achieving something, no matter how small, no matter how long it takes, which makes us feel fantastic. So our psychological well-being can be derived from all of these ingredients, and it's incumbent upon us to create organisations which feed our capacity to feel psychologically well. In other words, to provide the opportunity for us to achieve all of these inputs on this particular slide. Performance is all about the capacity to concentrate. We can have all the skills, knowledge and experience in the world, but if we can't concentrate, they're a waste of time. So what we've got to do in organisations is to create the capacity for individuals to concentrate on the tasks they're expected to perform. The difficulty with concentration is that it's extremely hard to achieve. If we were to make some sort of rule of thumb as to how long people could concentrate, that itself, there is no consensus about how long people can concentrate, but as a general rule of thumb, we can say that if you can try to concentrate for 50 minutes in every 60 minutes, then you can probably construct a working environment which gets rid of all the impediments to your concentration, all the diversions that we have and so on, so that you can apply pressure to yourself for 50 minutes of real focus on a job, knowing that in 50 minutes' time you're going to be coming to an end and therefore remain in control of the situation, remain in control of your pressure, in other words. After 50 minutes you need to have a complete break so that the brain can rest and then start again. Now we need to embed into organisations the whole idea of well-being and performance. So we need to embed in the organisations all those ingredients for individual psychological health, together with the capacity for the organisation to provoke our concentration. Our lives are spent in the company of events and behaviours. This is what we respond to. Events and behaviours occur all the time, but for the most part, our brain pays not very much attention to them because we've seen most of these events and behaviours before, and therefore we pay very little attention. However, there are occasions when events and behaviours occur which are not quite right, or they're out of context, or they're extreme, and therefore our personal responses become that much more acute. We become much more interested in what's happening and have to work out what our responses should be. So if we're trying to create an environment where individuals don't feel stressed, then we need to create an environment where the events and behaviours don't occur, particularly those events and behaviours which have the risk of causing a stressful response in other people. In other words, we have to try and encourage organisations to create positive events and positive behaviours so that personal responses are positive. So, we need to prevent events and behaviours that risk stressful reactions and promote and encourage events and behaviours that provoke psychological well-being. So there's a prevention and a promotion element to this. And these two aspects can be combined into a single approach. The way in which this is done is to follow what we call the Wellbeing and Performance Agenda. This is made up of 4 parts. 3 parts are to do with the events and behaviours themselves by creating a positive working environment, which we call an adaptive culture, which is led by a particular process of leadership, which we call adaptive leadership, and creating a working environment which is also supportive and positive, which we call an adaptive working environment. Now they create the context within which individuals work. Then the 4th element are you and me, our capacity to be adaptive and resilient in the face of events and behaviours. Now the argument here is that if we can prevent adverse events and poor behaviours from occurring in the first place, then we don't need to call on our resilience. So we need to create positive events and positive behaviours which then produce a positive response from us. In this slide we can see the sort of ingredients under each of the elements of the Wellbeing and Performance Agenda. Have a look at this. There's quite a lot to be done, and there's a particular series of approaches to be adopted, which I shall be describing in a minute. So we translate the Wellbeing and Performance Agenda into this overall development framework. There are 3 elements to this framework. The need to modify people's behaviour generally, which I call input behaviours, and then to use those input behaviours to embed them into the organisation to produce output behaviours. And it's the output behaviours which are the antidote to psychological distress at work. Let me show you what I mean. The input behaviours are these: attentiveness, which is the most important behaviour that we can have. If I'm attentive to you and you feel it, you'll reciprocate by being attentive back to me. But you have to feel as though I'm being attentive to you. Reliability is all about being consistent. Consistency is all about trustworthiness. They all go together in order to create an environment where no one is second-guessing the motivation of other people. Intellectual flexibility is all about our capacity to think independently and to think on our feet. Conflict resolution is all about resolving conflicts as they occur in order to resolve any possibility of a conflict rippling throughout the organisation, because then we all lose control of that. So conflict resolution is all about approaching everybody from the point of view of humanity, being interested in them, understanding people have frailties and so on. And the last headline is encouragement. Our capacity to support other people by encouraging people to take risks, encouraging them to complete activities and so on. Then those behaviours need to get embedded in the organisation, and this is where the well-being and performance agenda comes in. So we apply the input behaviours through adaptive culture, leadership, the working environment and our own resilience in order to produce the output behaviours which have a positive impact on well-being and performance. And these are commitment, trust, kinship, motivation, concentration and social engagement. The Wellbeing and Performance Agenda is based on two principles. The first of these is the principle of psychological responsibility. Psychological responsibility is about our own personal responsibility to ourselves to remain psychologically healthy and well. It's also about being responsible for the psychological well-being of everyone that we interact with. So we've got two parts to psychological responsibility: looking after ourselves and also making sure we look after everybody else. Some tips on adopting psychological responsibility is on this slide. We should always be attentive to others, listen to what they say, respond encouraging, ensuring that they feel valued and understood. And we should encourage people to think independently, to make your own judgments about situations you experience, and to avoid placing yourself in situations that may trigger a stressful response for you. And then acting with humanity, being very conscious about how your behaviour has an impact on others. Always act in ways that you would like others to act towards you. Be kind and understanding and show empathy to other people. The second principle is the principle of sharing responsibility for the future success of the organisation. And this is all about shared purpose, sharing success, sharing responsibility, sharing cultural values and corporate values, as well as kinship and mutual respect. Now, the notion of shared responsibility for future success might be difficult to grasp because it's about genuine sharing. It's about trying to encourage the workforce to feel as though it actually owns the organisation. So there are a lot of expectations placed on individuals. In this slide, it's all about sharing responsibility for the success of the organisation and not the reputation of managers. It's about sharing responsibility for independent and valid ideas coming from the workforce. It's about sharing responsibility for everyone being able to blow the whistle in the interests of future success. It's about sharing responsibility for everyone being capable to call foul in the interests of future success. And it's about sharing responsibility for everyone to feel accountable for the future success of the organisation. So we're now going to move on to some other triggers for well-being. We've talked about the need for the cultural environment to be positive, about a form of leadership to be absolutely supportive and encouraging, a working environment that does the same, and also the need for individuals to develop their resilience. So what we need to do, just to reiterate this, we need to prevent the events and behaviours from occurring in the first place that risk a stressful response. And we need to promote and encourage events and behaviours that provoke psychological well-being and to create a fabulous place to work. We also need to help other people strengthen their own personal resilience. So we're going to have a look at some of these triggers for well-being by adopting this framework which appears in this slide. Let's start with adaptive culture. So what sort of culture do you want? We've put up earlier a description of a fabulous place to work, a culture, a whole series of items. You need to go back to that slide and see whether there are some items there that are important for you to use in developing your own culture. But it's really important to write down the sort of things that you really want to do or really want to experience as having influences on the way in which you work. So I've put down on this slide some cultural values which have come up from our own work with organisations. Most people seem to want a clear purpose. They also want to adopt psychological responsibility within the organisation itself. And most people seem to respond well to sharing responsibility for the future success of the organisation. Other cultural values which have arisen is the need for integrity in all dealings, in other words, being open as far as possible and being truthful as far as possible in any dealings with the workforce or between the workforce and the customers and clients. And then there is this cultural value of trying to ensure personal ownership of the organisation. People who feel as though they own the organisation do share the responsibility for its future success. And so the notion of ownership becomes important. And lastly, the idea of kinship, feeling as though you are a corporate citizen, that everybody who works in the organisation feels as though they're part of the same family, therefore supporting each other, encouraging each other, being engaged with each other, and helping each other in times of difficulty as well as times of success. Now, the sort of resources available to you to advance your understanding of all of this is up on the slide now. We're now going to have a quick look at adaptive leadership. The question here is, what sort of leadership do you want? We promote adaptive leadership because that fulfills one of the two principles of the Wellbeing and Performance Agenda: shared responsibility for future success. So adaptive leadership is a process of leadership. It's not about heroic leaders, people leading from the front and expecting everyone to follow. It's about a process based on the notion of sharing responsibility for future success. This means that the workforce needs to focus on the success of the organisation and not the manager's reputation. It also means things like elephants in the room, the sort of subjects that no one likes to talk about. They can be raised and dealt with in an environment of no tolerance of humiliation or come back to anyone. In other words, people can raise the difficult questions without feeling as though someone is going to accuse them of something. It also expects people to critique other parts of the organisation, those parts of the organisation that they don't work in. So there is a general sort of critical awareness of how the whole organisation is working. It also expects independent thinking, so that people come up with fresh ideas as to how the future will be more successful than the present. Sharing of resources is routine. If there is a particular part of the organisation that is under pressure, financially for example, or through the lack of other resources, that spontaneously other parts of the organisation sets out to help. Everyone feels ownership for their own future as well as the future of the organisation, so they have a purpose in life, if you like, and everyone feels ownership for the future success of the organisation. So those are some elements of the leadership that you might consider. They are triggers for people's psychological well-being. If you want to know more about this, this is a resource that's available to you. So we're now going to move on to the working environment. And again, what sort of working environment do you want? Just going to focus attention on one aspect of the working environment. Other aspects of the working environment include information technology, technology generally, ergonomics, the physical environment for the organisation, one's ability to eat nutritional food, for example, as well as the capacity to go for exercise during the day. They all contribute to the working environment, and if properly done, are really positive supports to individuals at work. What I'm going to do, though, is just focus on one element of that, which is about management processes. Two things about management processes which end up by helping people feel positive is about meetings. Meetings generally can be the most boring experiences on earth, and can quite often produce very little action and activity. So there are just two things that I would ask you to stress. That is that if you organise a meeting, always try to sell tickets to it. In other words, it's a good idea for anyone who's attending the meeting to actually put their hand in the pocket and buy a ticket to come, just like going into a concert or some other form of entertainment. A meeting should be entertaining as well as productive. So, selling tickets for meetings, try and work out how you would do that. And the second aspect of meetings is that every agenda that you create for a meeting should always be a question to be answered, or several questions to be answered during the course of the meeting itself. This has the power of ensuring that people who attend the meeting are contributing to something quite positive. In other words, the solution to the question, or the answer to the question if you prefer. And it also means that individuals who are coming actually can have a major contribution to make. And only those people who have a major contribution to make are invited to the meeting in the first place. It helps to focus attention. So the combination of selling tickets to something which is entertaining, because meetings should be fun, and also the agenda which is based on questions to be answered, should actually elevate the interest that people have in meetings themselves and produce a much more productive outcome. If you want to know more about the working environment, have a look at this resource which is on the slide now. Now we're going to look at personal resilience. So this is the individual's capacity to respond to events and behaviours. Resilience is all about attitude. Now attitude, a positive attitude, tends to occur when people are in control of themselves mentally. Other forms of attitude tend to occur when people aren't in control of themselves mentally and have a sort of knee-jerk reaction to events and behaviours. But to be resilient, you need to be positive. Realise that you can cope with situations and learn from them and add to your experience. So the definition of personal resilience is put up here on the slide. In order to help people develop their personal resilience, this framework on the slide now is divided into three sections: our capacity to be in control of ourselves, our capacity to be in control of our responses to other people, and our capacity to be in control of responses to events. So, looking at personal control over ourselves, there are four elements of this. People who know themselves very well are much more likely to understand other people much better, why they respond and behave in certain ways. And that makes us feel more in control of our interactions with other people and our understanding. Determination is derived from understanding our own personal core values. They are the things that drive us. Therefore, they make us determined to see things through to a conclusion. People who have got some sort of vision also have a purpose in life, one of the key pillars of psychological well-being. The second value of having a vision is that if we've got something to aim for, then it tends to diminish the interference power of adverse events along that particular pathway. People who are self-confident are in control of themselves and don't suffer anxiety. So it's about being in control to an extent that you don't experience any form of distress. If you can control your anxiety, you can do anything. So people who are self-confident are people who don't experience anxiety in different situations. Moving on to personal control over responses to events, organisation is all about our capacity to organise ourselves in situations of chaos. Problem solving is all about our capacity to solve different types of problems, like logical problems, listening problems, emotional problems, and so on. And the last two categories are related to our personal control over responses to other people. Interaction is all about our capacity to be in control of an interaction, and the starting point here is to be attentive to other people. And lastly, relationships. Relationships which always should be important to our success and happiness. And the question here is whether those relationships are strong, and also whether mutual expectations have been established between people who are important to our own success and happiness. Now, the resources available to you in order to know more about personal resilience are up on this slide now. Well, thank you very much for listening and looking at the slides. Just to recap, we're looking at triggers to help individuals and organisations develop their psychological well-being. We started with section 1, looking at the background as to the reasons why we're interested in stress. Then we were looking at solutions to the problems of stress, then embedding those solutions in organisations. And the last section was to do with the implementation of the ways in which we can prevent stress from occurring in the first place. You will have gathered that the approaches help organisations develop peak performance from the workforce. Once again, my thanks for your interest in this subject and for listening to this presentation. Goodbye.